Welcome to The Breach Show, featuring sharp analysis on politics and social movements in Canada. I am your host, Desmond Cole, and we are just on the heels of two federal election debates in this campaign. Joining me to talk about that this fine morning are Elle Jones, who is, of course, professor, poet, journalist, and community activist living in Halifax. Welcome. And we've got Martin Lukacs, managing editor of The Breach and author of the recently released book, The Polyev Project, A Radical Blueprint for Corporate Rule. Hey, Martin.
Hey, Desmond.
Okay, so we all put ourselves through the experience of watching last night's debate. I actually watched the French one as well. To start off, I want to do a vibes check. And the reason I want to do a vibes check is because that's what these debates are to me. They're about vibes. They're not about substance. They're not about policy. They're not really about who won and who didn't win. They're just about an impression that the performers, I'm going to call them, on stage are giving the audience. And in this case, we had, of course, Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party, Mark Carney of the Liberal Party, Jagmeet Singh of the New Democrat Party, and Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc Québécois. The Green Party were very rudely excused from the debate at the last minute. We will talk about that. But those were your four performers on stage. Steve Paikin moderating the English debate. He's, of course, from TV Ontario. What were the vibes? I just kind of want to go through everybody one at a time and see how you guys felt about how they looked, sounded, carried themselves, performed. So let's start with Pierre Poilievre. And Martin, I'll go to you first. What vibes were you getting?
So I actually watched the debate in the Scotiabank Theatre in downtown Toronto at an event hosted by The Hub, which is kind of our evil twin. It's the right-wing outlet, very Poilievre aligned, that was launched around the same time as us in 2021. And so they hosted a watch party. My friend told me I have a taste for punishment for going. But it was interesting to watch people's reception of Poilievre. It was obviously a very loyal audience. They would cheer at his every, stylized put down of Carney. But it was interesting that the mood at the end of the debate was not jubilant by any means. I don't think he landed any of the kind of blows that can sometimes take a debate beyond vibes. There was no gotcha moments in terms of policy or politics. He was definitely more poised than the other leaders, but really didn't get under Carney's skin, which I think was the hope. And he also seemed to pivot back to making this about a change election. He repeated change I think 12 or 13 times. I lost count, but Trump didn't come up very much, and I think that's to his benefit. Did he do enough? I don't think so, and I think that was the vibe at the end of the night. One of the Hub's editors, the editor at large, Sean Speer, himself admitted that he didn't think Poilievre did enough to probably make a dent in the polls over the last key weekend.
Elle, I know you thoroughly enjoyed watching this debate. Give me your vibes about Pierre Poilievre.
He kept saying that, the lost decade, the lost liberal decade. And I'm like, yeah, but when you talk about a lost decade, you sound like you were just doing drugs the whole time. I don't know. He thought that was a real haymaker on that one. The thing I thought was creepiest about Poilievre was the way that he would interrupt, but he would do this weird mumble thing. So someone would be talking, and then he'd go no. He would just say that, that's not what you said. I know you are, but what am I? I'm rubbing you on glue. He would just have it, he would, Singh would interrupt, loudly, but Poilievre did this mutter thing that was so creepy. He just sounded like such a creep when he did it. Someone needs to fix that.
I definitely picked up on some of his mannerisms as well. Those were my vibes for Poilievre, was that it's like the robot that's kind of still learning how to be human sometimes. Not because he's not a good speaker. He's very polished at times. But I think, and I noticed this a lot more in the French debate as well, Pierre Poilievre has one note, and it's to attack and to be smarmy and to be the smartest person in the room. And so what he would do a lot with his answers is he would be belligerent and he would be like, your problem is this, you didn't do this, you messed this up. And then it's like he catches himself like 90% of the way through the answer and being like, this is all really negative. So then he has to turn it around and be like, and that's why we're going to lower taxes for a change. And then there's this weird smile that comes at the end, right? So it's like he's trying to manage his emotions. He actually looked really nervous to me during the French leaders' debate. But he only has one note. And if you're really interested in a debate where somebody attacks a lot, I guess Poilievre won this debate because he was on offense the entire time. Except again, for that time at the end where he tried to talk about how he really didn't get to connect enough with Canadians on the campaign trail. And then he lowered his voice to say it and tried to have emotion. Like this was really getting to him.
Just to give credit to him on the human level. No, I mean,
No.
I've just spent several months like dissecting the cynical and very skillful stratagem of the Conservative Party. I genuinely think that was real emotion. You can't just manufacture tears like that. This is obviously, I'm no Poilievre fan, but you can't help but be touched when you're coming into contact with thousands of Canadians coast to coast. Like, their
These the
humanity
same
gets through to
misty
you.
Canadians that are always telling him that they're cowering inside their houses in Toronto, clutching their car keys, lest a home invader / car robber like take their keys from their house, which is so incoherent. But
This is
you know,
it.
it's always like, I'm hearing from Canadians, and then it's the most like absurd thing. I'm hearing from Canadians that hordes of rampaging criminals that are carrying their bail status like directly on, so we all know that they're on bail, invading homes in Toronto.
I very much feel you on this, Elle. This man's been a politician for 20 years. The idea that he doesn't get to spend enough time talking into individual people on the campaign trail is the worst kind of retail politics. It reminds me of the Ford brothers just being like, I got into politics to like save you, the customer, 10 cents on your dollar. Like, I don't believe it. And it doesn't, maybe this is me personally, it doesn't resonate with me personally. Mark Carney, who came into this obviously in the lead in the polls, he also happens to be the prime minister because he took over for Trudeau. He's the front runner. He was attacked the most. Martin, what were your vibes on Mark Carney?
I think he probably did what he had to do, which is, remain that kind of like calm, steady, big daddy banker voice, that Canadians have been gravitating toward in droves. He showed some of his like lack of political skillsmanship when he was unable to effectively deflect from some of those key questions, like his involvement in setting up tax havens for Brookfield, or Brookfield's involvement in, buying up huge amounts of rental property and jacking up the rents. He never really had a good answer to those. So I think that might have hurt him a little bit. Did it hurt him enough? Probably not. He also had this like weird, maybe this is appealing to some people. He would have this smirk. Whenever he was being attacked, he would start kind of like, almost like giggling. And I don't know if that was like a mental concession that he made unconsciously to those attacks. I'm curious what you guys made of that.
Well, I thought it was funny at the end because, they said everybody gets a question and everyone asks Carney. And I'm like, you're that bitch and you cause all this conversation, right? Which he actually said at one point. He's like, maybe I should ask myself a question. And,
That
like
was a funny moment.
Somebody pointed out that, Poilievre has tweeted something like 307 times about Carney, and Carney's tweeted like 3 times about Poilievre. So, yeah, he had this advantage of just by default kind of getting that adult in the room vibe. That said, I have a dark-sided thing to say. I'm going to offer myself as a political strategist at this moment. How come nobody... Okay, instead of Lost Liberal Decade, why aren't we going with the liberal clown Carney?
Say more.
Well, I'm just saying, like, Carney, clown Carney, he's a Carney. Like, there's just... Like, that name just offers you so much. Why are we not doing something with it? Come on, guys.
Underexploited resource in the 2025 campaign.
Like, Trump would be on that.
Trump
The thing
would.
I thought, speaking of Trump, the thing I thought that Carney really fumbled is I would have done a whole like these are the policies that you've taken from Trump and we see what they're doing in the US thing, and he never did that, right? Like you should have been going through and saying you've proposed doing this to universities, you've proposed this with protests, you propose, and just gone through all these policies and just said like this is Trumpism. Canadians don't want that. It's causing chaos in the US and it's destroying the economy, and Polyev is just a junior Trump. And he never said that. He let Polyev take that kind of like, so they had an argument about who was going to be stronger based on who was going to love oil and pipelines more. Like that was their opening. I love oil more. No, I love oil. You didn't love oil enough. You broke up with oil. No, I two-timed oil, And what you should have said, and that Carney never said, was just like, we don't need Trump light here. Because that's the thing that's made Polyev unpopular, and he just never landed that. So it was quite, in fact, like baffling that he didn't go there.
And my thought, Elle, it's a good point. My thought about why he didn't do that is because I feel like Mark Carney is just not comfortable in venues like this. He's not a natural when it comes to speaking, when it comes to interlocution. Like he was nervous too. I think you could see at points that he was nervous, and I think Martin, that might have been the mannerism of the kind of and people study for years to know what to do. People talked about Ronald Reagan when he was in debates, and people would make a point attacking him, and he would get this not quite smirk, but a subtle little smile on his face that's like, oh, here you go again. And people loved it, but he knew how to control it. I mean, the man was an actor, right? So people can study for decades to learn how to do these things. Mark Carney's just, in terms of his skill as a debater, he's not there. So he didn't go aggressive or do a lot of these kinds of things, Al, that you're talking about. My impression, my vibes of Mark Carney, extremely boring, so boring. I checked out a lot of times when he was talking. He would be making a lot of lists. He was trying to kind of really.
I'm going to give you
three quick points.
That's right.
And then
Exactly right. And a lot of them were very repetitive in their style, all of them. But yeah, Carney was really relying on those kind of tactics, and I would just stop listening at some points when he was speaking. I'm not going to lie, because it became really like trying to get into the policy weeds, trying to sound almost like a caricature of a banker at times.
Well, okay, so Carney said he writes his own talking points, right? When Polyev was like, oh, you're using Trudeau's advisors, they write your talking points. And Carney's like, I write my own talking points, actually. But I actually think that this oil ad wrote Carney's talking points. I think he took his script from it.
It's a company called Cenovus Energy. I guess we can play the clip.
This is like literally Carney all debate.
Canada. It's spelled with a can. So, when no one thought it was possible to unlock the potential in the oil sands, it should come as no surprise that Canadian innovation and tenacity proved them wrong.
Carney, it's spelt with a can, not a can't. You should have done that.
Damn, no, I mean
that for free.
That last line he lifted exactly to the letter when he was asked about how carbon capture and storage is a total fairy tale. He was like, "Oh, you're questioning our ingenuity?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for our ingenuity, the oil sands would never have been a thing." It's like a perfect encapsulation of the rhetorical, like, we're both X and Y. We'll spend less but invest more. We'll protect the environment while frying the shit out of it.
So for me, I don't think he gave anybody a reason to be like, this is the guy we need. But again, that debate's not for me. I'm not the target audience. So who cares what I think? But let's talk about Yves-François Blanchet, the Bloc Québécois leader, running only in Quebec, obviously. But on this English leaders debate, he was also in the French language debate. Martin, what were your vibes about the Bloc Québécois leader?
He's the one who brought the levity, and strangely, considering English is a second language, almost the most ease on stage. Perhaps because not because of his lack of English skills, but because he had the least to lose. I think he was the most comfortable, but he landed some of the best blows. He went some way towards puncturing Carney's reputation as this esteemed negotiator. I think my favorite line of the whole debate was when he said, what have you negotiated except tax havens and Bermuda? This reflects poorly on Jagmeet Singh. he brought the most sanity into the room about the climate crisis. He was the one who said, guys, we don't actually need more oil pipeline projects. And some of the supposed tech solutions, tech fixes that you're proposing are fairy, like carbon capture and storage, which is one of Carney's big proposals, is a fairy tale. It was funny being in the room with a bunch of conservatives. They also appreciated Blanchet more than anyone, and they believed there was a poll at the end of the debate from the people in the room, and most of them felt that Blanchet won the debate.
Yeah, I saw this tweet, Mark Greenan, I think, and he said, "Oh, to live life with the joie de vivre of a Bloc Québécois candidate in the English debate." So they're just there. He's there to like advocate for Quebec. He has no stakes. So beyond that, also like what crises have you managed, which was hilarious. He also had a good line about like fairy. What do you say? Ethical oil is a fairy tale. When he was talking about the environment, right? And when he called Polyev out on that. So yeah, he got to land a lot of blows on people. But I mean, it's also this very weird dynamic where, yeah, like you have this guy in the debate that like literally is there to advocate for one part of Canada and then is just on stage being like, you didn't talk to Quebec. Like you didn't meet with Quebec when we wanted to meet with you. It's like, okay. Like it's this very weird dynamic of like, you have to pander to me because I'm the Bloc Québécois leader and Quebecers want to hear this. And nobody else gets the, like Manitoba leader or the Nova Scotia leader that gets to go and be on stage and say that. So it creates this really weird dynamic in terms of the debate where you have 3 national leaders and 1 regional leader that just by virtue of Quebec's position in the parliament gets to be on stage. So yeah, it's very strange.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember back to the days when Gilles Duceppe was the leader of the Bloc Québécois, and he explicitly said in a debate, he pointed at his competitors and he said, all 4 of you want to be prime minister and I don't. And I mean, when you can come into a debate with the luxury of playing a game that no one else is playing, you are going to be relaxed. Yves-François Blanchet for me is he's just the chill uncle, who's come to dinner, and he's very studied. He's not worried about anything you say. It's never going to change his mind. He's extremely confident. And yeah, I think he was extremely effective at times, more so in his attacks on Carney, as Martin, you mentioned, than Polyev, because he didn't always seem like he was trying to go for the jugular. There were times when he was like, yeah, I can concede your point on this. He had a lot of jokes. He was so chill that it was relatable to me. His performance as a debate performer was by far the most relatable. He seemed like a guy. He seemed like a guy that you would talk to. Finally, we have Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, coming in to this, everybody talking about his seat being in danger, lots of NDP seats across the country being in danger, and that he, somehow needed to do something to kind of salvage the position that his party holds right now. Martin, what were your vibes on Jagmeet Singh?
He brought this like full-on heckler energy. I think it came off like undignified and even maybe desperate. Desperation politically, considering where the NDP is in the polls, and also to me like a lack of confidence in his ability to land blows and make points when he had chances to speak. And I found like he was able to make some decent points about, for instance, Polyev's how Polyev's cuts would make life more unaffordable for Canadians, or how both Carney and Polyev were competing to be the best, the BFF of big oil. But on the other hand, like when he had the chances to speak, he never really articulated a clear, distinct vision. Like even on the climate crisis, like he was not willing, when posed the question directly, able to say, no more pipelines. No more pipelines. Like what? I mean, even Blanchet was willing to say very clearly, a pipeline's going to take 10, 15 years to build. By that point, we don't even need oil anymore. So his beholdenness to some of the oil-friendly wings of the party, especially in Alberta and BC, really hamstrung him. And the truth is that it's been what now, 8 8 years since he's been leader of the NDP.
That's right.
And it feels like he still hasn't really improved his debate skills and his speaking skills. Like he doesn't have any of the cadence and the meter that makes for an effective public speaker in the way that Poilievre and I think Blanchet has. And even Carney at certain moments is able to deliver lines with a bit more gravitas. And I think
I knew you were going to say gravitas in there somewhere.
Oh, really?
I was waiting for it. Let me go to L on this.
Yeah, so if Poilievre's interruptions were like the creepy, no, I didn't say that. That's not anything. Like, Singh just came across like this yap chihuahua, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not touching you. I'm not even touching you. I'm not even touching you. Like, he was like that, Like, so some of his interruptions were good. The problem with Singh, and this is kind of what Martin was saying, is he would get halfway there on a critique, and then instead of actually making the critique, so he was correct when he's like, oh, you're talking about the border, Poilievre, but then you went and cut border agents. But then it's like, I'm going to have border agents, instead of just saying, the point is that you say all these things that you're tough on this and tough on that, and your policies don't actually follow through. So it's a valid point to say you said you were tough on the border, but then you've gone and cut border agents, right? But then what I don't need to hear from the NDP leader is I'm going to hire 9 million border agents, so he'd always then try to outflank them from the right. And what's the point of that? He had a really, I thought that was a good point when he's like, let's not be ridiculous. This is so stupid. Everybody on stage is against crimes. Like, that was a good point, right? When you're like, this is a ridiculous political game that you play when you try to pretend like somebody else is for murderers. Like, nobody's for people being murdered. But then he follows it up by being like, I love prisons the most, actually. We all love prisons. I want to build a prison right in my backyard. Like, instead of saying, like, this is a ridiculous rhetoric. Nobody's for crime, but your policies have been proven to fail. Like, let's look at what happened in the Harper regime. You had this tough on crime idea, and look what happened. It didn't actually benefit anyone. So he can never take the critique to the place it actually needs to go. He's willing to start it, and then he just wants to basically be like, I'm a better conservative than you are. So that was the problem.
I feel I agree with a lot of what both of you have said. Jagmeet Singh struck me as woefully unprepared for these debates. And I think a part of that for me was about you have to be prepared to articulate an alternative vision in a debate. It is not enough, just like I'm criticizing about Poilievre, to come in and tell everybody why the other people mess up and are no good. And for most of his political career, this has been Jagmeet Singh's problem, is a failure, right? To articulate his own vision, an alternative rather than simply critiquing. And I get it. I think maybe if I could try to jump into his head last night, it's like he was saying, first of all, I have to remind people that I'm still here, number one. But also, I am running now not to be prime minister, right? But I'm running to be a critic, to hold people's feet to the fire. So I'm going to actually demonstrate that in this debate. I'm going to demonstrate how I can be aggressive and how I can hold people to account. But again, if you have nothing to offer beyond the critique, what are we doing? Perfect example. You've brought it up already, Martin. French language debate. They asked each leader, do you want to increase oil production in this country? Yes or no? That was the question. Obviously, Carney and Poilievre were like, yes, of course, right? Yves-François Blanchet gave the most nuanced and I think the appropriate answer, which was, we have to draw down production gradually. I'm not going to tell you I'm doing it all tomorrow, but yes, over the long term in Quebec, our plan is continue to rely on hydroelectric, continue to develop renewables, and gradually draw down on oil production. Jagmeet Singh was asked about it, and he tried to say, let me tell you about the kinds of energy that I like. And he did that twice when he was pressed by the moderator. You just look like you're not serious. And you look like if you have a conviction that you're afraid to say it. Yves-François Blanchet ate his lunch because he was not afraid to say, maybe we still have to produce oil now, but we won't in the future. Maybe there's a nuanced way that we can make a plan to draw down over time. Jagmeet Singh wasn't prepared to do that. And when you mentioned BC and Alberta, Martin, let's see how the NDP does for all of their trying to salvage those constituencies. Like, I'm not really sure what the point is.
That's exactly it. And honestly, this brings us full circle to where Jagmeet Singh started as a politician, federal politician, when he ran for the leadership of the NDP back in 2017. In that leadership race, I remember he was trying to have it both ways. He was trying to certain audiences maybe be against pipelines, to other audiences be definitely maybe for pipelines. And I think it's that lack of conviction ultimately that has marked him as a wishy-washy politician that never really emerged as a powerful alternative to the liberals.
He did. I do have to give him credit for calling out Polyev, and he said, the way you talk about Palestinians is disgusting. And
Yeah, that was in the French debate.
Yeah.
He used the term dégueulasse en français to say, you want to defund UNRWA, which is the leading and essentially one of the only humanitarian organizations operating in any meaningful way in the ground in Gaza. And Polyev said that because there was, according to him, evidence that people in UNRWA have been responsible for the October 7th attacks, a handful of people were accused of that by Israel. Therefore, Polyev said, we've got to just defund the whole thing. And yeah, very expertly, Singh said, why would you want to defund the whole thing? Why wouldn't you address the problem of those few people? And in French, that was probably across both debates.
Mind you, he asked for an investigation when there's already been an investigation that cleared UNRWA in its entirety.
Which is why I said according to Polyev, because I've still not seen that evidence. Right?
The other thing is that, this is a problem I have with our brethren on the left. I think moralizing language of that sort doesn't really speak to anyone beyond the choir. When you call something disgusting as opposed to laying out why it's wrong, I don't think you persuade new layers of people.
I'm going to slightly disagree on that, Martin, only because when it comes to the issue of Palestinians being, wiped out in the Gaza Strip, most of the appeal publicly has been a deeply emotional and moral one, and it's swayed a ton of people. Mm-hmm. And it's because no one is actually willing to say the most basic things to defend Palestinian people's humanity. So I think even doing that, and particularly on such a big stage, to me, it does land because everyone's afraid of doing it.
Was willing to say genocide. And I'm not a big supporter of the NDP's position on Palestine. I think they came to it way too late. I think they're still wishy-washy. I think he could have put the question... it was like that discussion they had about the rights of prisoners, right? Where Carney talked about the charter, but again, he said it, but could have articulated better. The point of rights is that they apply to the people that we don't like. There are no rights if they do not apply to murderers and terrorists, whoever you think are the bad people. And he never said that because, again, he's so technocratic. So he was basically, I'm defending the charter, but you need to say why it's important to defend the charter. There are no rights for anybody without charter rights. And similarly, when Singh called out Polyev and said it's a genocide, but he didn't say, he couldn't, and this is kind of what you're saying, Martin, he couldn't articulate, why shouldn't Palestinians decide their own future? Why do we get to stand on this stage and say, I'm going to get rid of Iran because Palestinians are just brainwashed and, why don't you hear from Palestinians? You're not even interested in them. And it's, 18 months into a genocide and you're still do you condemn violations of international law? He couldn't even say that and put people on the spot. I'd have gone one by one and said, do you think that Israel is committing war crimes? And since that's obvious, why aren't you willing to do anything about it? But nobody could ask that. So again, it's this inability to just land basic points in a clear way because everybody's so caught up in, as you say, Desmond, performing and peacocking and posing that they can't just say the things that need to be said. And again, this is why, the Bloc Québécois does better because he could just kind of speak and say what he wanted to say.
One thing I didn't like about Jagmeet Singh's performance across both debates was that he seemed to have to inject the language of, kindergarten morality into almost everything that he said. So he would make a point and he would be like, that's wrong. Or, this is what, just his affect was one of somebody who was almost coming to these things for the first time, and just a very basic kind of analysis of this is good, this is bad, and not enough of what you're talking about, Elle, which is I'm a policy person who thinks about answers to these questions. I have an answer. Here it is. I'm going to lay it out for you. And you don't have to even like it, but you'll come away from this debate thinking that guy has a plan. He's thought through these things. It just seemed very much he doesn't respect his audience as a debater.
One other thing I was struck by was the woke washing that Polyev did of his criminal injustice agenda. So when he was asked, I think it was by
About, oh my God, that was so
Jagmeet Singh,
bad.
like, won't your tough on crime agenda disproportionately impact Indigenous peoples? And he said, it's Indigenous peoples who are the disproportionate victims of crime.
But then he said the most messed up thing. I messaged Desmond about this, like screaming, because he said, I met a wonderful group of people in Saskatchewan who were murdered by a serial killer or something. Like, he made this really weird, he was talking about, I don't know who he was trying to talk about. He was saying that it was someone that was out on bail that killed like Indigenous people.
It was
right?
the mass
Yes.
killing on that reserve in
But
Alberta.
then the way he put it was a
Saskatchewan.
wonderful group of people. I'm like, a wonderful group of murder victims? Like, that's not really how you talk. Like, it was such a bizarre way of framing it.
No, and then
There's
he
a
did.
wonderful group of people in Saskatchewan who were
And then
murdered.
he did it again to justify his use of the notwithstanding clause to override charter rights when he was talking about Alexander Bissonnette, who murdered a number of people in a mosque in Quebec City. It was just quite the gall of the man to do that.
And no
kind
one
of.
called that out. That's another thing that Singh could have said. Like, you're on this stage saying Islamophobic things, literally talking about radical Islam. And then why do you think people come into mosques, right? Like, if you're going to interrupt people, at least interrupt them on that, you know?
I will give Jagmeet Singh a break in one sense, which is that Carney and Blanchette were not going to do what you just suggested, Al. They weren't going to make the overriding, but hang on a minute, your analysis is incomplete here. They were just going to try and look prime minister. Well, Blanchet's not trying to look prime minister, but he's trying to do the respectability thing. So it is kind of left to Jagmeet Singh on a lot of this to do a certain level of heavy lifting that his others on the stage are not going to do. But what bothered me about the stuff about mandatory minimums is, why didn't somebody say, so my guy, you want to use the notwithstanding clause, which has never been used in the history of this country by the federal government, for like 5 people in Canada? Is that how small your agenda is in this election? That you're trying to make law that is so important to you and to your base that you're willing to override charter rights for like a handful of people in this country who are probably never going to get out of jail anyway, let's be honest. Because all they had to ask him was, how many of these people that you're talking about are out on the street right now? How many people have been let go after committing these kinds of crimes who are a danger out here to the public? Like, name 2. Just name me somebody, because this is a problem it's a solution, I should say, looking for a problem. And no one called him out on that. And I thought it was just like, this is typical of what conservatives do nowadays, is that they raise a huge moral panic about something. And then their answer is like this big, like focusing on the tiniest little things that they have said are about to destroy the country. The Green Party did not participate in this debate. The Green Party was kicked out of participating in both debates. The morning of the French debate on Wednesday. I'm not going to get into the technicalities right now for time, but suffice it to say that the commission that puts on these debates, if they thought that the Green Party had not met the rules and requirements, surely they got to that conclusion before the morning of the debate. And the accusations that they caved to pressure to not allow Jonathan Pedneau to participate in these 2 debates, those ring true for me. And I think it's really sad because, as we said, Jagmeet Singh was really bad at articulating anything about the environment, and having another party who has the ability to do that, that's running nationwide, would have been nice. But more importantly for the Green Party, I think, Jonathan Pedneau is running as the co-leader with Elizabeth May. And these debates, for a party that has so little national profile, so little money, they were an opportunity for Pedneau to like introduce himself to Canada. And he was cut off from doing that the morning of the French leaders debate. And I think it was really brutal. I don't know if either of you want to say anything about that, but I really wanted to get.
I mean, it's entirely possible the Elections Commission did just like figure it out that morning, because they seem to have been doing their homework like very last minute. They, in the same vein, they apparently didn't realize, after they capitulated to rebel media's push to have as many of their so-called journalists at the post-debate scrum, they didn't realize that Ezra Levant had registered as a third-party advertiser doing direct anti-Carney advertising and advocacy. It's like, oops, we didn't realize that. I mean, we might have been able to use that to prevent them from making an absolute mess and comedy of the whole elections, debate aftermath. So, yeah, I think there's a real reckoning overdue for how Elections Commission conducts itself.
And how debates are organized in general. And I have to say that because not a single party in this election released a platform before these frickin' debates. So everything they said is essentially useless because they haven't told us how they're going to pay for it. They haven't told us what they would change or get rid of in order to implement their plans. There's no details. And they're doing this on purpose. And we've seen this in places like Ontario, where Doug Ford has essentially run 2 campaigns without ever releasing a platform. And I'm scared that this is going to be the norm now. That from now on, what we're going to see are campaigns where you don't release a platform, you don't get into specifics, it's all vibes, it's all affective, like what we're talking about with these debates, and who comes off as they said in the United States with Bush, the guy you want to have a beer with. I hesitate to ask what the uptake of these debates is going to be. As we are recording this, people are able to vote in advance voting right now. So there was a poll that came out that said the vast majority of people who are going to vote have already made up their minds, and that was before these debates happened. I'm not of the opinion that these debates do a whole lot to move public opinion. They just give people like us something to talk about. Let's be real. And to give people an opportunity as political actors to go on TV and say, I really think our guy moved the posts today and was able to kind of advance our agenda. And I think Canadians are going to be taking a second look and all this stuff. But as far as what it's going to do in the real world, I think the outcome of this election is probably already baked in.
I have a slightly different opinion. I do think that from a close reading of the polls, it does look like since Trump has left the daily headlines, the number of undecided voters has gone up. So that pool of undecided voters is much larger than it was in the first 3 weeks of the election. And I think we're coming up to a long weekend. A lot of people are going to be having conversations, sometimes incredibly awkward, at their Easter, lunches. And my hunch is, to play like the egghead Politico, I do think this debate is going to lead to a little bit of a bump for Poilievre. I think especially as the, people's day-to-day concerns around affordability and the cost of living come back, return to the fore in people's minds, rather than Trump. I think that will give an advantage to Poilievre. Is it enough to turn the tide? I think probably not. Because the Liberals built such an advantage in the polls, they have a much more efficient vote spread across the country, unlike the Tories, whose vote is more concentrated in certain regions. But I do think Poilievre still has a fighting chance, especially if he can come out next week and really give it. But I think Carney has definitely not been exposed as the kind of neoliberal, austerian that he will likely be as a prime minister. And I think that's the key thing. I think there's still such widespread manufactured delusion about the kind of patriotic savior that he is for this country. And I think if he does become prime minister, there's going to be a whole lot of people stuck with broken hopes about who this guy is.
I tend to think that sometimes doing this kind of forecasting is overdetermined. Like if Jagmeet Singh had as bad a debate performance or set of performances as I think, that could help Carney because some of the people who were still sticking with the NDP, there's so many factors. The Conservatives doing better now in the actual election day could be seen as like, well, the debates gave them a boost, or it could just be that they always had a better ground game and were always going to turn out more people than the polls thought that they would. So I feel like it's always really hard to play this game. We will see. We don't have much more time left. Elle, I'm going to give you the last word on any final
Yeah,
thoughts,
I mean, I already said
observations.
this that Carney wasn't able to launch the knockout blows around what conservatism is, and it's because he's a conservative himself, like which is modern liberalism. So the very thing that needs to be done, which is to say your whole movement is a fraud. Like you guys talk about populism, you talk about the economy, you talk about all these things, and we see what happens when you're actually in power. You destroy the charter, you destroy the economy, you destroy all these. Like he could not say that. And the reason why he can't say that is because they don't actually want to attack conservatives. As we know, the liberals will attack the left, and they never really want to attack outside of like far right ideology. They don't want to expose conservative ideology. So that was the thing I think that Carney could have done, which was just basically say to Polyev, you're a giant fraud, but he was not willing to go there. I do think that the opportunities that Carney missed is precisely because of what Martin said. I actually do think that exposes him as the neoliberal, austere, useless person he is, precisely because he's unwilling to go to the places that would have actually affected how we think about Polyev. So,
Well, I'm grateful to both of you for this spirited conversation. And I'm grateful to everybody for watching and listening today. Want to remind you that the election, of course, is coming on April 28th, a Monday. And we are going to be live on breachmedia.ca as of 8 p.m. doing all of the election result analysis. We will have the big board updating all of the figures of where the votes are coming in. We're going to have a lot of special guests. Al, you're going to be with us, and we're looking forward to having quite a few people from across the country to give us their thoughts about this election campaign and about what results we're going to be seeing. So that's breachmedia.ca, 8 p.m. on Monday, April 28th. Please join us. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for tuning in today. If you like what you've heard on The Breach Show, please subscribe to this podcast. And if you want to support our work, please become a sustaining member to help us produce journalism for transformation. You can do that by going to breachmedia.ca/support. Thanks for listening.